Ladies and gentlemen, Lloyd Evans with the Lloyd Evans YouTube channel. He's an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and we're going to be digging deep into the failed prophecies of the Jehovah's Witness organization. And there's been so many of them. Before we do, make sure you guys like this video, hit that bell on the subscribe so you're notified every time I drop a video, and consider becoming a patron. I've got tons and tons of videos on the Patreon that you get early access to. And of course, more goodies will be coming this year for those who are on higher tiers within our Patreon. I really appreciate the efforts on helping make this possible and continue to grow. Make sure you guys go check out Lloyd Evans' material as well. Let's talk to Lloyd Evans. We are Myth Vision. Welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Ladies and gentlemen, you see who we have on the channel. What is going on, my brother? Welcome to the channel, Lloyd Evans. He's looking behind him.
Hello, lovely to be back. I had a blast last time and basically wanted to repeat the success of our conversation. So here I am.
Well, dude, I'm going to be honest, man. I'm like, I've been watching you, every single show you put out.
That's unnerving. I'm not going to lie. That's unnerving.
I knew you would say that. I knew you were going to say that. Listen, I have a wife, okay? You don't have to worry about that part, okay?
Okay.
Lloyd, seriously, though, I've been enjoying your content, and you have a YouTube channel. For those of you who do not know, and you're popping onto this video, you haven't gone and subscribed, I'm telling you, you will not regret going and checking out his material. Some of the most interesting Jehovah's Witness and ex-Jehovah's Witness material I've seen out there. And the way you articulate yourself, Lloyd, you think. We can tell you're precise in what you say. And that's because people are watching you that aren't your friends who are trying to get you, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. I try and be as precise as possible because I remember what it's like to be on the other side. And I remember what it's like to be totally convinced that Jehovah's Witnesses have the one and only truth, and apostates must be liars who feast at the table of demons, and they must be trying to mislead people. So I try and make every video with that in mind, so that there are as few reasons as possible for someone to say, oh, this chap fits in with that stereotype more or less exactly. So yeah, that's my approach.
Thank you once again, David, for helping make this possible. But and then Dr. Robert Price. We interviewed a man who's an ex-Jehovah's Witness elder. He was an elder called Alan John Miller, that he goes by AJ or the Aussie Jesus. This guy, being an elder, gave talks at the JW assemblies and conventions in front of tens of thousands of people numerous times. I believe he was interviewed at Bethel to become a circuit overseer even. I know your buddy John Redwood, now Mark O'Donnell, is or was planning to write an article on AJ for your new blog, which I believe has recently changed from JW Survey to jwwatch.org, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, correct. We just wanted to make it a bit more newsy. We have been in the past been quite keen on collecting figures for, knowing how many people feel about a certain way about a certain issue, and we want to make it more about news from now on. So
interesting. Did you see the interview I did with Aussie Jesus?
I didn't watch the whole thing. I was familiar with this gentleman. I've known about him for quite a number of years, so it did pique my interest, and I tried to muscle through a bit of the interview. But if I can be completely blunt, I felt as though he was very disrespectful to you and Robert. I would have liked to have heard more from Robert, to be honest. It felt a little bit like, even though it was your show, you became quite sidelined, and Robert in particular became sidelined, even though Robert's knowledge of the Bible is frankly of far more interest to me than this chap who was on. I frankly have a very limited bandwidth of interest for people who are crazy and people who are sufficiently deluded as to think that they're Jesus. So I can stomach so much of it so long as it's nicely proportioned between him making his claims and perhaps you and Robert responding to them. And it probably wasn't as even as I would have liked, but I think it was a major coup for you to get him on the channel. And well done. It was these are the sorts of exchanges and interactions that I think are helpful, if nothing else, so that people can understand the depths of delusion that people can sink to. I mean, we all know in theory it's possible to encounter people who think they're Jesus, but to find one of these nutcases who's brave enough to, go on camera and talk about it, that's next level. So well done. It was a very interesting video, even if I wasn't able to stomach as much as I would have liked. Yeah.
Well, I have to admit, man, it took a lot from me, and I said, okay, I have a couple options. I could do like everyone else and be critical, or I can just be kind and ask questions in a way that just kind of lets him say, because most of my audience are already critical thinkers. Most. I'm not gonna say everyone, but most.
Yeah.
And 100%. I felt like his answers were long-winded and they rabbit trailed off the topic too, so I couldn't really probe on some of these issues. But yeah, he was an EXJW, and I think that the framework of the JW cult, honestly, and this is just my opinion before we get into the failed prophecies of the Jehovah's Witness Church, which is the reason this video is being produced. This is just something that I had to get Lloyd to hear and comment on. I think the Jehovah's Witness Church, honestly, has set up the framework for the delusion. Now, don't get me wrong. The guy already probably had issues. What I'm saying is, I was told, and you're going to get, this is a shocker, I can't say who right yet till they're ready to come out, that when he was an elder, he caught through the grapevine in the church, oh, this person's drinking or this person's doing that. And he would go at night or go out and hide in bushes with binoculars and observe people in the act of going to buy alcohol or whatever it might be, and then confront them so that they couldn't deny, so that he could excommunicate them or he could shun them and get them out. And he felt power doing that. And so yeah, there's that setup. The JW Church works perfect for a guy like this.
It's behavior and delusions that, let's be honest, aren't sanctioned. You're not going to find material encouraging people to think they're Jesus, and you're not going to find material for elders telling them to sneak around in the bushes with binoculars. But what you will find in there is only a hop, skip, and a jump away from that level of delusion. So, it's almost inevitable when, in the case of elders, when you give them so much power, that one or two are going to take it too far, and it's more than one or two, believe me. And it's almost inevitable when you have decades worth of literature that uses such flimsy argumentation for asserting that a group of dudes are God's channel with mankind. It's inevitable that people are going to think, well, if it's that easy to argue these sorts of claims, I've got a few claims of my own to make, so it's almost inevitable. It's just very rare. I mean, I get people emailing me all the time saying, oh, I'm Hezekiah, I'm Isaiah, or I'm whatever prophet reincarnated or what have you. They're brave enough to email. They're very rarely brave enough to go on camera and talk about their delusion. So again, major coup getting this guy on.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen again. But anyway.
Especially now I've said all that.
Yeah, I don't think so. So don't get any ideas, Hezekiah and Isaiah or whoever you are. I'm just kidding. Lloyd.
Elijah. Sorry, it was Elijah, not Hezekiah. Hezekiah was
Elijah.
A king.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, either way, I'm just throwing them.
Yeah.
That's funny. The New Testament, it's so clear from the scholarship out there. They thought, not only did they, if there was a man, Jesus, and I suspect there was a guy who said, look, these things are going to happen soon. I mean, the language is very frank. Anyone who reads words in Greek like mello and such, it's clear. It's about to happen. Whatever it was supposed to happen. Most scholars say it didn't happen. Most of the church pushed it on and said, oh, it will. This stuff will happen because he said it would. It just didn't happen yet. So there's kind of a delay. And so JW is being strict about text. They're pretty much fundamentalist on steroids. They look at these texts and they're just adopting the same vibes that come from the New Testament. It's about to happen. It's about to happen soon. The destruction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I figure it's good that we go into the Jehovah's Witness failed prophecies and maybe have you explain some of the few failed prophecies. And I guess firstly, though, and the research found this is an interesting quote in the Awake magazine. If you are a young person and also need to face the fact that you will never grow old in this present system of things, Awake, 1969, May 22nd, page 15. So let's start with 1914, I guess, unless you have that quote specifically pulled up.
I do. So this is what the magazine actually looked like. You can probably see there, it says, "What future for the young?"
Yes.
Yeah. So this was a 1969 Awake article. And yeah, it said what you just said. As a young person, you will never fulfill any career that this system offers. If you're in high school and thinking about a college education, it means at least 4, perhaps even 6 or 8 more years to graduate into a specialized career. But where will this system of things be by that time? It will be well on the way towards its finish, if not actually gone. So it was telling people in 1969 that they wouldn't even have a chance to complete their higher education if they wanted to go through higher education, because Armageddon would be here by then.
I got to warn anyone who's a Jehovah's Witness right now. If you think you're going to stump Lloyd, the guy has your sources. The guy goes to the source. He has the original books, guys. So, I mean, just I would ask that you open-mindedly listen. Yeah.
I will say one thing, just a point of interest. It's jw.org has updated in recent years so that there's more information from its past available, but it's still shockingly little compared to what they've actually printed. And just to illustrate, you can read Watchtower articles going all the way back to 1950, but it's always been the case, even when the library was on CD-ROM, that you could only ever go back as far as 1970 for the Awake magazines. Isn't it interesting that this particular magazine was printed in 1969? Almost as though, you don't want people reading that anymore, actually. We've had a change of heart about how near the end is. Yeah.
I love that you point this stuff out, man. Like, and I'm glad more people are starting to, like, a lot of people I saw in your recent live, everyone go subscribe to this channel. I'm telling you, you got to check it out. In your recent live, you're a huge light, a beacon of light that gives other people, not only, like, of course, people who don't do YouTube, like, inspiration on saying, hey, I can leave. There is a life outside. But you're inspiring people to also repeat and do their own thing and create their own channels to try and come up with stuff. And so I really just want to say, man, seriously, you're awesome. You're a hero in the EXJW world.
Well, that's kind of you to say. I don't see it that way. And, interestingly, someone tweeted about this the other day, and I retweeted about it. I try and steer people away from this idea that any one individual is like crucial to, or is like the final word on apostasy, because I was awoken myself by Ray Franz, now deceased, Paul Grundy, who I've had the privilege of meeting and interviewing several times now. Look, we all have a finite period in which we can do our thing. Not everyone's able to do their thing, of course, but I'm not going to be around forever. One of the reasons why I did that live stream is because I think it's incredibly important to encourage the next generation of activists, because, if I encourage the idea that I am somehow, some guru or, the final word on apostasy, what happens if I need to stop doing this for whatever reason? So I just view it as like a team effort. I view it as a multi-generational struggle. And I'm very, very proud to play some small part in it. But yeah, it's very generous when people say the things that you've just said. But I try and, as much as possible, shine the light on the collective rather than the individual.
And that's good. That's what makes you who you are, man. And I really do appreciate that. And that's also why I do the interviews with the XJWs on my channel. Is like,
unless, of course, you want me to claim that I'm Jesus, in which case, let's set up a live stream. That's apparently a thing nowadays.
Yeah, if you guys really want attention, just claim to be Jesus. Yeah, there's so much I could say about that, and I honestly don't even want to. So 1971, you said, was the cutoff date, or 1970?
So they've made available awake articles from 1970 onwards, and this was printed in 1969.
Interesting. Yeah, perfect, isn't it, guys? I guess we're going to go into some stuff that predates even that today, and I think that'll be interesting to show you guys like the birth, not just the birth. I'm saying the early stages.
We're not showing anyone a birth on this show. It's I don't think YouTube would monetize that sort of content.
Yeah,
and I'm anatomically unlikely to achieve that feat if I'm completely honest.
Yeah, I don't know if I could either. So let's start with 1914, Lloyd. I know this religion places so much emphasis on this year, which coincidentally started with World War I. For our Myth Vision viewers who are slowly starting to learn about this cult, why is 1914 such an important year for Jehovah's Witnesses? Did Charles Taze Russell predict the end of the world in 1914?
Well, he did, but it was borrowed. He borrowed almost all of his ideas from someone. And before he decided to write his own magazine, he was reading a lot of material and information from 19th century thinkers who were influenced very heavily by William Miller, who predicted, of course, that there would be a rapture, that there would be the second coming of Jesus in 1843, and then he changed it to 1844, and they called it the Great Disappointment because, surprise, surprise, nothing of the sort happened. And there was a string of kind of followers who then kind of just mimicked the same sort of date-setting fanaticism. One of these was called Nelson Barber, and he came up with the chronology or the explanation that pointed to 1914 as being a date of significance. And he wasn't the only one to do that, by the way. There were others. So Charles Taze Russell basically pulled together all of these pieces of the jigsaw from various different thinkers and created his own hybrid, religion that at the time was called the Bible Student Movement, went on after his death to be called Jehovah's Witnesses, but they basically arrived at 1914 from the year 606 BCE, which they thought was the date for the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar. We now know that's totally not true, as confirmed by cuneiform texts. And also 606 was changed to 607 when they realized there was no year zero, because they wanted to keep the end point at 1914, because by this point they'd figured out that at least something happened in 1914 of significance that they could point to as indicating that it was a year of significance, even if it wasn't quite how they predicted it to be. But the point is, before 1914, they did point to 1914 as being not just the beginning of the last days, which is what Jehovah's Witnesses now believe. They pointed to it as being actually the final cut-off for Armageddon. And this is spelled out in this book. The time is at hand. Actually, it's spelled out in multiple books and magazine articles, but this is one of the most compelling quotes, I think. So on page 101, it says, "Be not surprised then, when in subsequent chapters we present proofs that the setting up of the kingdom of God is already begun, that it is pointed out in prophecy as due to begin the exercise of power in AD 1878, and that the battle of the great day of God Almighty, which will end in AD 1914, with the complete overthrow of Earth's present rulership, is already commenced. The gathering of the armies is plainly visible from the standpoint of God's word. So that's what they believed when the writers of this book were doing their thing. And today, of course, Jehovah's Witnesses say, oh, that's a lie. Charles Taze Russell never pointed to 1914 as Armageddon. He predicted that the last days would begin in 1914. That's not true. It was only after Russell died that later generations, specifically Joseph Rutherford in his Birth of a Nation article in 1925, he switched everything around and just, rummaged around and kind of rearranged a few dates and said, no, 1914 was when the last days begin. You can actually hear in the text there that Russell was obviously convinced that Christ had already arrived and begun to exercise power in 1878. It was 1914 that was supposed to be the cutoff for him.
Wow. And this is something that they still can't get out of their system, as you guys will see in the upcoming quotations and stuff, because this whole Armageddon thing, it's an Armageddon cult. And this keeps people in the fear of, do you want to be in paradise earth? Do you want to see your loved ones? Do you want to be there with us? It's just crazy. So the original founder, Charles Taze Russell of the Jehovah's Witness Church, he died in 1916, obviously disappointed. None of his predictions came true. And then a new leader, Judge Rutherford, which you just mentioned, Joseph Rutherford, took over, and he created a campaign called Millions Now Living Will Never Die. And from my understanding, he predicted Armageddon in 1925. Ooh.
So
is this actually printed in the Watchtower?
This is an original. This is one of two originals that I have. This is actually, you mentioned John Redwood earlier, Mark O'Donnell. This is a copy I'm saving for him. I just can't be bothered to send it to him, but it's his copy. But yeah, obviously the title itself is unfortunate, isn't it? When you consider that this was published in 1921. Millions then living certainly have died. In fact, all of them, pretty much.
Wow.
You could probably find a handful of people on the planet today who predate in terms of their birth 1920, but it's a very, very small number. It's certainly not millions. But on page 88, it gives some explanation for 1925, and then it says, what then should we expect to take place? In the type there must be a full restoration. Therefore the great antitype must mark the beginning of restoration of all things. They spoke in types and antitypes. So in other words, there's an initial fulfillment and then there's a grander fulfillment. The chief thing to be restored is the human race to life. And since other scriptures definitely fix the fact that there will be a resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and other faithful ones of old, and that these will have the first favour, we may expect 1925 to witness the return of these faithful men of Israel from the condition of death, being resurrected and fully restored to perfect humanity, and made the visible legal representatives of the new order of things on earth. So he was saying that by 1925, the new order of things on earth would be in place, and in fact, people like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob would be involved in administering it, because they would be resurrected by that time.
Huh.
Bold claim to be making in 1921, but hey, got to give it to him. He went.
Did that get published in the Watchtower publications?
Yes, yeah. So, Millions Now Living Will Never Die is obviously one of the most famous publications for, explaining the theology behind it. But it was repeated in multiple publications. In fact, my favourite version is in The Way to Paradise, which you can just about see in my bookshelf there.
Yeah, right there.
That was written by W. E. van Amberg, who was one of the Watchtower directors, and he went into embarrassing detail as to exactly what Abraham and Isaac and Moses and David would be doing, and how they would set up a government in Jerusalem and fly around on aeroplanes and broadcast on the radio to administer the kingdom, the global kingdom. So it was all very embarrassing, really. And interestingly, in the current publications, obviously this all predates everything that's on Watchtower Online Library, but you can find, and I don't have the reference to hand, but you can. Hang on, I'll find it. It's just easier to find it for you. Okay, there was a Watchtower article in which it was, yeah, there we are. So it's the Watchtower of 1984, October 1st, and it's actually the life story of, I think, Carl Klein, who is a former governing body member. He's since died, but there's a footnote in that Watchtower article, and again, you can find it online on the jw.org website. It actually says in one of the footnotes of the life story of Carl Klein, regarding his misguided statements as to what we could expect in 1925, he, that's Joseph Rutherford, once confessed to us at Bethel, quote, "I made an ass of myself." So Rutherford apologized or made conciliatory remarks to people at Bethel, but he never wrote in the publications to all rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses, "My bad, I made an ass of myself." He was too proud to do that, obviously, but if it was a private conversation to his minions at Bethel, he was willing to joke about it.
Wow. That tells you a lot about how they are. I mean, that's just... And it never ends. It's still going on. I think it's hilarious. The guy that we talked about who talks like this. And I don't even know his name. What's the guy's name who does that?
What? Who are you talking about
He
now?
does the...
Oh, Stephen Lett.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he's talking about, we're part of the end of the end, or how does it go? He said...
The final part of the last days, yeah.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, Lord, I wonder what's going to happen in 20, 30 years, how they're going to view this guy. It's like, when again? Okay. So I went to the jw.org website, and I cannot seem to find any Watchtower publications prior to 1950 and Awake 1970. I mean, it's not like these guys cannot afford the hosting or bandwidth or whatever you want to call it, technology, etc. Why do you think they capped it at 1950 and not allow current Jehovah's Witnesses to access old publications?
Because it's embarrassing. Because if witnesses can do research into everything that the quote-unquote faithful slave has ever produced, then they'll come across all of this stuff, and it will be immediately transparent that far from being God's channel, this is a man-made religion that makes it up as it goes along and frequently gets it wrong. And what you will often find Jehovah's Witnesses say, confronted with this material, is they'll say, "Oh, well, that's just old light. We've moved on since then. It was wrong then, but it's right now." Well, they had the similar mentality in 1925, of course. They were saying similar things, I'm sure, about the 1914 prediction. Oh, well, it was wrong in 1914, but it's right now. Now we're in 1920, whatever. And also, it is relevant, if you are a Jehovah's Witness, to research this material, because let's not forget, it was in 1919, according to Jehovah's Witness beliefs, that Jesus invisibly, conveniently, chose the organization to be his faithful slave. So the question should then be asked, what was so impressive about the organization back in 1919 that caught his eye, that made it so that he had to choose this organization in particular to be his faithful slave? The organization isn't shy when it comes to promoting certain cherry-picked examples of how great it was in yesteryear. Why are they the only ones who get to interpret Watchtower history? Why not let Watchtower history interpret itself, especially when you have this claim that the organization was chosen by Jesus in 1919? Okay, let's see what they were predicting in 1919, shall we? And things soon start to unravel when you follow that line of argument.
Interesting. It is interesting. And so, just so we're fair, What do you think the Jehovah's Witnesses will say about why they're not publishing things before 1950 or whatnot?
I have no idea. I mean,
They've never said anything.
This is the problem. They're not transparent. They, as far as they're concerned, they owe no one an explanation. If they felt they owed anyone an explanation, they would have given an explanation. But this is the problem, that they are completely lacking in transparency in a number of areas, by the way, this just being one of them. And they consider themselves answerable to no one. So I'm convinced it's because they're embarrassed. Who knows what their argument would be? I would love to hear it. I'd love to hear it.
Me too, because I can only imagine. Lloyd Evans, we've got a 1975 failed prophecy as well, and the slogan, stay alive till 75. I could see that sounding like a good juvie little jazz song or something. So can you tell us what happened in 1975, or at least what the
I can tell you what
was?
Didn't happen. I can tell you what didn't happen.
I love it.
Yeah, so this was a prediction that was made in the book Life Everlasting in Freedom of the Sons of God. There it is, published in 1966. Wow. And it was a really bizarre... It's difficult to even explain how they arrived at 1975. It all had to do with, again, the types and antitypes. In the view of the leaders at that time, everything in the Bible had to have a grander fulfillment. So if it mentioned something in the Old Testament about a Jubilee year celebration, there must be a grander meaning behind it. And they decided that it all had to do with how many thousands of years we were from the start of man's existence. I'm not sure whether my camera is going to pick it up, but they publish a table. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
But right at the bottom of this table, you're probably not going to be able to pick it up there, but right at the bottom it says 1975, end of the 6th 1,000-year day of man's existence, and then in brackets, in early autumn, to be precise. And it was very interesting the way they phrased things. So they said how appropriate it would be for Jehovah God to make of this coming 7th period of 1,000 years a Sabbath period of rest and release, a great Jubilee Sabbath for the proclaiming of liberty throughout the earth to all its inhabitants. This would be most timely for mankind. So it was very nudge, nudge, wink, wink. We're not saying it's 1975, but it's 1975.
Yeah.
And so this was essentially the tone of the publications at that period. And you had in other examples in the magazines and in the newsletters, the Our Kingdom Ministry newsletters, very overt calls for people to, sell their businesses, quit their jobs, just throw everything into the preaching work, because the end's coming imminently. And when we say imminently, you want to stay alive till 75, was what Charles Sinutko said in the talk that you referred to. So this, again, was a very clear prediction. And the frustrating thing was they never apologized for this. They published, I think, in 1980. Ironically, Ray Franz claims to have actually penned the apology. And it would have been far more of an apology, he claims, if he'd have been allowed to have the final say over how it was worded. But they came up with some way of reasoning their way through the whole thing and just trying to shrug the whole thing off as essentially, one or two. Maybe we've gone a bit too far, but ultimately no one should be serving with a date in mind, etc., etc. And recently, in a recent convention, I'm trying to think exactly which one. I think it was the 2017 Don't Give Up convention. They even created some dramatizations, which you can see on the jw.org website, where they portray this period in the organization's history. And they outright blame it on a few individuals getting carried away with their Bible study. But, you put it in a bloody table, in this book, and pointed to it and said, wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be appropriate timing if something significant were to happen in this year? What else are people going to think if you're then attaching to that suggestions that people should be, selling their homes and quitting their businesses and what have you to preach that the end is near? So that was the whole 1975 debacle. They made a prediction, it didn't come true, and rather than own up to the whole thing, which they should have done, they instead blamed it on people who took them at their word.
Yeah, the zealous witnesses, it seems like they're like, oh, they were overzealous. That's all. JT and Lady C, they have a critical thinking EXJW YouTube channel, and JT said when I interviewed him, which I got to do an interview again with them. They're just really wonderful people, and he said, I have a lot of respect for people in 1976 who left the organization. I mean, he said the guys who left then, who didn't have internet, who didn't have all that we have, the evidence that we have, the way that we have it, when that didn't come to pass and they left, he said, I got a lot of respect for those people, because that's very difficult to do, to accept that they literally failed and this organization is not worth staying in. That means a lot. You know what I mean? So I can totally get why, because there's people who find out stuff like this, but they still shove it and suppress it down, and they don't allow it to affect their life and what they're doing in the JW church. They just keep pressing on. It's easier to keep going and following the rest of the sheep than it is to try and leave and get a new life, if that makes sense.
Well, a lot of people left, but a lot of people stayed. More people stayed than should have. Hence the organization is what it is today. I mean, really everyone should have left, shouldn't they? Or it should have been reduced to just a few hundred crazy zealots. But even though they did have a decline, and incidentally, the figures for 2020 were the first decline since the fallout from 1975 in Watchtower figures. So it's happening again now.
Interesting.
There was a dip in figures, but then the figures went up again. It's shameful, really, and it's an indictment on how easily people can be persuaded to stick with something. It's essentially the sunk cost fallacy. If you've committed, decades of your life potentially to a religion, you're going to be more forgiving than someone who's only just got involved, aren't you? Because you've already invested so much, you have more to lose if it turns out that you're being lied to. So you kind of don't want to be lied to.
Yeah, so you can literally, cognitive dissonance can kick into hyperdrive. I see it. And just poking, I got to say this before we move on to the next thing. This goes to show why Mormonism survived, even though Joseph Smith died out and all the crazy stuff he did. He could have been caught red-handed and Mormonism would still be alive. It goes to show you why the New Testament, Christianity at least, continued after. This goes to show, even if it's failed, this thing still can be alive. A movement already started, there's already vested interest, and people are already persuaded, and therefore they're not going to let it down. And it always shows how people want to continue to reinterpret the meaning of things. Oh, he came, he was invisible. He was behind that cloud there. You couldn't see him, or whatever. You know what I mean? So it just goes on, and it goes to show. So, yeah. Okay, 1989, there was a goof up. And this is gold, I think. I say it's gold because growing up in the 80s and 90s as believing Jehovah's Witnesses, we, or if you will, David, who wrote this excerpt here, my family and even family friends would not have even dreamt for 1 second that this wicked system would ever go past the year 2000.
Yeah, so this was interesting because it actually, the example that David has pointed to, I actually have done a video on this. I think I called it the 1989 goof up or something along those lines. This is an interesting one because it simultaneously shows how terrible they are at predicting Armageddon and how deceptive and disingenuous they are. Because what happened was they predicted it and then immediately covered their tracks. So, and when I say immediately, I mean it made its way into the printed Watchtower magazine, but I'm just trying to find the exact page. Here we are. So here is the Watchtower magazine in question. So that's the 1989 January 1st Watchtower.
Wow.
And this is the page that I'm going to read from. Just I don't know whether your camera's going to pick this up. But
yeah, we can't read it, but yeah,
it's the middle paragraph is what I'm going to read from. Basically, if you go on my channel, I do a whole video where I show that I'm not conning people and I'm not making this up. So
right.
In the original magazine that Jehovah's Witnesses were distributing in 1989, it was talking about the Apostle Paul. Paul went on to make 3 recorded missionary tours plus his journey to Rome as a prisoner. In the course of these, he opened up the work in several cities in Europe and preached the kingdom message in countries and islands that today are known as Syria, Cyprus, Crete, Turkey, Greece, Malta, and Sicily. He may even have reached Spain. He helped establish congregations in many cities. What was the secret of his effective missionary activity? Actually, I've read the wrong paragraph. The paragraph before says, the Apostle Paul was spearheading the Christian missionary activity. He was also laying a foundation for a work that would be completed in our 20th century. So the preaching work will be completed in the 20th century. Why does it need to be, or why will it be completed? Obviously, because Armageddon's come. They were writing in 1989. Whoever wrote this was clearly saying, there's no way we're going to get to the end of this century and Armageddon hasn't come. What's interesting is when you look up the same paragraph, it says the Apostle Paul on jw.org, by the way. It says the Apostle Paul was spearheading the Christian missionary activity. He was also laying a foundation for a work that would be completed in our day. So they've changed it from it's going to be completed in our 20th century to it's going to be completed in our day, which could mean anything. So how
long after they printed that one to the new one? Exactly.
It was quite quickly, because if you look up any bound volume and they create the bound volumes, so the bound volume is when they take like these magazines and they literally bind them all together for a given year. And in any 1989 bound volume, it will say completed in our day, which is what they've done here. So literally by the end of 1989, and this was published in January, they'd realized this was a monumental fudge up. Don't worry, we'll edit it in the bound volume, But the problem is, of course, that they were printing millions of copies of this thing, and inevitably someone was going to keep hold of one of them. And inevitably, of the many copies that were saved, one of them was going to find its way to me or to another EXJW YouTuber, so they could show it on their channel and say, look, I'm not making this up. Here it is. So
interesting. Yeah, it sounds like every single time something happens, it doesn't happen. What woke up David's dad, and I wish David was able to be here, but it's like, I don't know, 2:30 in the morning in Australia. So what woke up David's dad only recently, after 48 years in the Borg, the generation of 1914 that will never pass away. Lloyd, can you explain this?
Yeah, so this was repeated in so many publications. Probably one of the best examples,
I was going to say, if you have it, that'd be awesome,
is the Live Forever book. So the Live Forever book was what I kind of grew up studying as a young Jehovah's Witness. This was the study book that they would take you through in order to advance you to baptism. And the prediction was, I'm just going to flick through until I actually find the illustration, but the prediction was, okay, we're not going to give you an exact date for Armageddon, but here's what we will say. The generation of people who were alive in 1914 and able to discern that the last days had begun in that year, they will not die out before Armageddon comes.
Do you have this publication here, by the way?
Yeah, I've got that in my. I've got that magazine in my bound volumes.
I just figured I'd show it because I think this is in the vein of what you're talking about.
So this is an interesting one as well, because so you can see there, this is a watchtower from 1984, and they're showing a bunch of Bethelites, who all of whom were born before 1914, all of them. And what you can actually find if you Google this image is that people are showing you what these people's names were. And bear in mind, the title of the magazine is 1914, The Generation That Will Not Pass Away. They're pointing to these literal people who were Jehovah's Witnesses in 1984 and saying, you know, a good number of these folks basically are going to walk straight through into Armageddon, because that's how close we are.
Wow.
And what's interesting is that you can find a graphic if you Google that image where someone's gone to the time and trouble of saying, okay, this individual born 1912, died 1989, you know, and they've gone through each and every one of them to show they're all dead. You've literally put these people on a magazine effectively saying this group of people aren't going to die before Armageddon comes. They're all dead. And here is the image in the... You can probably just see at the bottom of the page there.
Yeah.
In bold, it says Armageddon.
Wow.
And just to the left, it says 1914. And the caption says, some of the generation living in 1914 will see the end of the system of things and survive it. So it's there in black and white, and that was what I was raised believing. Wow. Yeah.
Wow. And so you were raised believing that, but weren't you after? When did all these people die out? That's a good question. Like, when did every single one of these people no longer live?
Oh, seriously, it's just a case of Googling the image, and it literally lists all of. If you're talking about that particular illustration, someone's gone to the trouble of telling you who these people are and when they died. But the point is, they weren't giving a date, but they were saying within the time frame of this generation, not just people who were born before 1914, but who were old enough to figure out that this was when the last days had begun, or notice that the last days had begun. This generation will not die out. And they changed the teaching in 1995. It's undergone a number of teachings since then. I think it was 2010 when they came up with the existing teaching, which is referred to by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses as the overlapping generation. So what they literally now say is, and they've actually gone to the trouble of doing it on with a pointy stick on a chart in one of the JW broadcasting episodes. What they now say is, okay, so this was one generation that witnessed the events of 1914, but this generation overlaps with people who are of the anointed class who are still alive now. So what they're essentially saying is you can have multiple parts of a generation. Just enough parts to cover Armageddon, I guess. Maybe we'll only need 2. So, which obviously is butchering the meaning of the word generation. You know, if I say, you know, in Robert Price's generation, Armageddon's going to come, you know, and Robert Price dies, hopefully not too soon.
Yeah.
You know, people are going to be saying, "Hang on a minute, what was that? What was that prediction you made, Lloyd?" doesn't seem to be coming true.
Yeah.
So it was a blatantly false prophecy. And, let's be clear, I was raised on this. I got baptized. This was one of the issues that I had to basically declare my belief regarding to an elder when I was going through my questions. And basically the religion was able to move the goalposts, but you're still held to the pledge that you made when you were being taught this. So I was baptized at the age of 11, and I'd studied the Live Forever book, and this was the teaching that I was pledging myself to. And they were allowed to change the teaching between 1995 and 2010 to the point where, we don't know, it's kind of overlapping, I guess. But I'm not allowed to say, I'm out, this is wrong. You guys are making this up as you go along, without being punished by being estranged from my family. It's very, very wrong the way they get to move the goalposts, but everyone is held to their dedication that they've made to the organization for life. They're not allowed to change their minds.
This is an interesting organization, and I say that because they're very eschatology minded, very. And unlike most of Christianity kind of defangs the apocalypse. Some push it like it's coming soon. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of fundamentalist dispensationalists who think the rapture's any day now. The third temple in Jerusalem is going to be built. They're just always something. But if you want my personal blame game.
Do.
Okay.
I do want it.
I'm going to blame.
Give it to me.
All right. The Bible. The Bible is the source. I mean,
Derek,
it opens
telling it like it is.
I got to, man. Matthew 16, 27 through 28. For the Son of Man is going to come with his angels in the glory of his Father, and then he will repay each person according to what he has done. Truly I say to you, there are some standing here. To who? Go a couple verses before 27, because I only got that reference here. He's talking to his disciples. There are some of you standing here who will not taste death till they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And people try to go to the transfiguration as an explanation for this passage because it's in the next chapter. Nobody died, so why bring that up? Nobody's dead between chapter now and chapter then. It's just
Wasn't it C.S. Lewis who said that if Jesus didn't believe that the second coming was going to come, within a short period, he was some kind of sadist or some kind of psychopath? Because that's what he was whipping people into a frenzy over, the idea that it would be any moment now, that there's no hint in anything that he's saying that he was referring to something that would happen hundreds or even thousands of years in the future. There's just no hint of it. It's all going to happen now. You guys are going to see it yourself,
Yep. He talks about this generation, which people try to reinterpret the meaning like you just talked about. And I mean, I always, when I do these JW discussions, I always try to reference back to Christianity itself, not JWs or something. I get the Jehovah's Witness person because they know Jehovah's Witness, but I point it back to my own Christianity because I had dreams. You guys aren't the only ones who had to suffer from this kind of stuff. Now, of course, far more of a high control group. The cult you guys dealt with was far more damaging with respect to controlling people's lives. But man, these teachings alone, when they cause you to separate yourself from even in your own house, you can't help but think your dad's going to go to hell because he's not confessed or received the Holy Spirit. And at that time it was speaking in tongues. That was a sign that you had it was speaking in tongues and gibberish. That was where I was at in this. So I just look at the New Testament and ask anyone who's watching who hasn't, considered these things, look and see how they may not have happened, how they kept thinking it was going to happen then. Paul does this. Other books say it is the last hour. We talk about the end of the end, or what's his name? Whatever guy.
Final part of the final part. Yeah.
Dude, in 30 years, it's going to be the final part of the final part of that final part is here, and it's just not going to stop.
Well, look, in 30, 40 years, there'll be other people entirely from us having this same conversation, going through all of these dates, and they'll be adding Stephen Lett onto it, That they're still doing it now. But I take your point It's not just Jehovah's Witnesses who do this. I do think that, there's a limited number of groups who push this thinking to such a damaging degree that, that families are literally broken up. I'm sure that there is shunning in other non-Jehovah's Witness fundamentalist Christian groups, but to have shunning not just mandated, so you have to shun whether you like it or not, essentially, but also depicted in heart-tugging propaganda videos, that's taking things to like a whole other level, you could say. But I take your point, that this is an issue, that this kind of constant date-setting fixation with the end of the world is an issue beyond Jehovah's Witnesses. And I think there's an element of self-fulfilling prophecy, because, of course, if you think that the end is coming any moment, you're going to be less invested in efforts to engage meaningfully with, for example, combating climate change and trying to make the most of our opportunities now to save our planet and to leave something for future generations to inherit and make use of. You're going to be less bothered about those sorts of initiatives if you think the Earth's going to be destroyed any moment. There's an element of self-fulfilling prophecy, because your indifference towards these struggles now can lead to the Earth being rendered uninhabitable because not enough people care.
That's true. That's why I keep blaming the text. I mean, don't get me wrong, the religious systems are there, but think critical about these texts, because they thought it was going to happen then. And for those of you who want to go, oh, no, haven't you read the verse? A day is like 1,000 years, and even the Son of Man doesn't know the day or hour. Yeah, the same Son of Man tells
people
you.
People have been saying that for people have been saying that for hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. At what point do we say, actually, it's all a load of bollocks?
Yeah.
At what point does the penny drop and we realize that this stuff isn't to be trusted as a guide to what's happening or going to happen?
And I always tell, within the sandbox of that thinking, you can argue he doesn't know the day or hour, sure, but he went ahead and attempted in Matthew 24 and Luke 21. I think it was Luke 17 or Luke 21. Anyway, it's the same apocalyptic synoptic comparison. And anyway, he gives the season. He may not give the day and the hour, but he tells you the things that are going to come and all this stuff. And that was back then, not now. And there's good reason to think some of the stuff was written after the events of the destruction of the Jerusalem temple for very good reason. So thinking critical about that, you won't be keep date setting in the 21st century, and you can move on with your life. I mean, there's a way to really enjoy it. So with that being said, Lloyd, I ask that, do you think, and this is a prediction guess on your part, do you think that the Jehovah's Witness church, because it's not a very old church, I mean, it's only been around for how long since its start? I mean, not what they claim that they come from.
You've got to be a bit careful, because Bible students don't like you saying that Charles Taze Russell founded Jehovah's Witnesses, but come on. He founded the Watchtower organization, which later rebranded as Jehovah's Witnesses, 1879.
Okay. So we're looking at 150 years, give or take, existing of a church. How much longer do you think this church has before it stops doing all of this apocalyptic stuff? It's built off of that, but I mean...
It's complicated. I think that religions can basically last infinitely. Charles Taze Russell was a crackpot who believed that the inches in the passages of the Pyramid of Giza, if measured, hinted at periods of time in Bible prophecy. He believed that the skin of the Ethiopian, in other words, black people, their skin would turn white in God's kingdom. He had all sorts of outrageous, obnoxious ideas, and yet you can still summon hundreds of people around the world in the 21st in 2021 who follow his teachings, who are Bible students, who identify as Russellites, not Jehovah's Witnesses, followers of Charles Taze Russell. So if those people are still around, You know, over 100 years after this guy died, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses, I'm sorry to say, they're with us in some form or other, potentially for hundreds of years. The question is, will the organization be around in an identifiable form? And that's a different question, I think, because it's one thing to have kind of groups of people huddled together, in far-flung parts of the world who hold a candle for this crap. It's another thing entirely to have a multi-million-dollar or a multi-billion-dollar organization making HD videos and printing magazines and books and what have you. I think that the days are numbered for the organization, because I just think it wasn't equipped or built or designed for the 21st century, when there is the internet and when there is Google and there is people able to draw on resources that instantly debunk the teachings. I think that it's already in its death throes. I mentioned that last year we saw the first decline in Jehovah's Witness numbers in 42 years since the fallout from 1975. So that, the omens are already there, that they're on the decline. How long it will take, who knows? Whether they will go bankrupt or not, who knows? But I think in some form or other, we will have Jehovah's Witnesses for potentially centuries.
Interesting. Thank you so much. Everybody go subscribe to Lloyd's YouTube channel, of course. And Lloyd, is there a way that they can help? Is there a Patreon? What do you have in ways that they can help you in your tasks?
Oh, right. So, yeah, I do have Patreon. It's patreon.com/Cedars. The channel is Lloyd Evans. I have, I think, over 600 patrons now, and they're supporting my work. I now have a video editor, which makes things so much easier. Just bought a new camera as well, it's amazing what CGI can do, isn't it?
Yeah.
but no, it's there's lots of ways to find me. I'm conspicuous on social media. Many would say too conspicuous.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please go help Lloyd Evans out with this. I really appreciate you, man. You're awesome. Taking the time to come on Myth Vision Podcast and to tackle failed prophecies with the Jehovah's Witness Church. Ladies and gentlemen, hit like on this video. Go check out his stuff. Like, comment. It grows the channels. The algorithm loves it. And I hope to see you again here. Once again, Lloyd, we can do this again. So
it would be my pleasure.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are Myth Vision.
Allegedly.